The room was silent except for the faint hum of Caroline's laptop. The soft glow from the screen cast long shadows across the cluttered table. Elise leaned in, her elbows resting on the table's edge, staring at the coordinates displayed on the screen. The numbers seemed innocuous but held the promise of answers and danger. "There it is," Elise said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hand instinctively tightened around the phone, as though it could shield her from the weight of the truth. Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. She crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair, her expression skeptical. "Or it's a setup," she countered. "Think about it. They know you have the phone. They know we're chasing this. How do you know they didn't leave these coordinates for you to find?" Elise turned toward her, her eyes sharp. "Do we have any other choice?" she asked. "If this is a trap, then at least we'll know. Sitting here won't get us any closer to the truth, and you know it." Caroline's gaze lingered on Elise for a moment. She could see the stubborn determination in her eyes, a spark so reminiscent of Oliver, it sent a pang of guilt through her chest. But she pushed it aside. "Fine," Caroline relented. She stood and closed the laptop with a decisive snap. "But we're not walking into this blind. We proceed cautiously. No unnecessary risks." Elise nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Her thoughts drifted to her father. She imagined him seated at his desk, poring over files like the ones she now carried. Would he have hesitated here? She wondered. No, he wouldn't have. He would have acted, just as she intended to. Caroline drove, her hands steady on the wheel. The car hummed quietly as it glided along the empty highway. Outside, the city had given way to stretches of dark forest and endless fields, their shadows dancing under the moonlight. Elise sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the side mirror. Every now and then, a pair of headlights would appear in the distance, sending a chill down her spine. "Do you think we're being followed?" Elise asked, breaking the tense silence. Caroline glanced at the rearview mirror. "Hard to say," she admitted, "but it doesn't matter. Assume we are and act accordingly." Elise leaned back in her seat, her fingers gripping the edges of the phone. "It's unsettling," she murmured, her voice almost lost in the hum of the engine. "The idea that someone's always watching, tracking, like we're just pieces on a chessboard they're moving around." Caroline's hands tightened on the wheel. "That's exactly what we are," she said flatly. "But that doesn't mean we can't flip the board." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, broken only by the occasional rumble of the tires against uneven asphalt. Elise's thoughts drifted back to her childhood, to the times her father would take her on long drives like this, pointing out constellations in the sky. She remembered how he'd always talk about resilience, about standing firm in the face of adversity. She clung to those memories now like a lifeline. The headlights reappeared, closer this time. Elise stiffened. "Caroline, I see them. I see them," Caroline said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes darted to the mirrors, scanning for exits. The car sped up, gliding onto a side road obscured by trees. They drove in silence, hearts pounding, until the headlights disappeared. Caroline exhaled sharply, her grip on the wheel loosening. "We're clear, for now." Elise didn't respond. Her thoughts were already on the destination that awaited them. The coordinates led them to a crumbling building nestled deep within the woods. Vines crept along its walls, and the faint scent of damp earth hung in the air. Caroline parked a safe distance away, cutting the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. "This doesn't look like much," Elise said, eyeing the structure warily. Caroline grabbed her bag, slinging it over her shoulder. "That's the point. If it looked important, it wouldn't have lasted this long." They approached cautiously, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth. Elise's breath hitched as she stepped through the doorway. Inside, the air was heavy and stale, the darkness oppressive. Caroline switched on a flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. "Over there," Elise whispered, pointing to a steel door at the back of the room. Unlike the rest of the building, the door was pristine, its surface gleaming faintly in the dim light. Caroline's flashlight illuminated a biometric scanner beside the door. Elise stepped forward, her heart racing. She raised the phone, aligning it with the scanner. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss, the door unlocked. The room beyond was a stark contrast to the decay outside. Shelves lined the walls, filled with meticulously organized files, USB drives, and old videotapes. A desk stood at the center, a single laptop resting on its surface. Elise's breath caught in her throat. "This is it," she murmured. Caroline's gaze swept over the room, her expression unreadable. "Your father didn't leave anything to chance," she said quietly. Elise's fingers brushed against a file labeled Phoenix Contingency. She opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. Diagrams, coded messages, and financial records filled the pages. Each detail was more damning than the last. "Elise," Caroline called softly. "You'll want to see this." Elise turned to find Caroline holding a videotape. The label read, "For Elise. The truth." Her hands trembled as she loaded the tape into a nearby player. The screen flickered to life, revealing her father's face. He looked younger but weary, his eyes shadowed by the weight of untold secrets. "Elise," he began, his voice steady but somber, "if you're watching this, you found the vault. This is the heart of everything I fought to protect, and everything they'll kill to keep hidden." The video revealed a shocking truth. Oliver had been deeply entrenched in Project Eclipse, once a willing participant before turning against it. His betrayal had painted a target on his back, and now on Elise's. Elise's vision blurred with unshed tears. "Why didn't he tell me?" she whispered. Caroline placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe he was trying to protect you. Or maybe he thought you'd understand when the time was right." Back at the safe house, Elise's mind was alight with determination. She spread the files across the table, her focus razor-sharp. Every piece of evidence felt like a puzzle piece clicking into place. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so close. Caroline watched Elise from across the room, her expression unreadable. Guilt gnawed at her, a constant ache in the back of her mind. She turned her attention to her phone, its screen lighting up with a familiar number. Stepping away to answer, she kept her voice low. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was calm, calculated. "Miss Voss, I believe you have something that belongs to us." Caroline's grip on the phone tightened. "Who is this?" "Someone who appreciates your talents," the voice replied smoothly, "and someone who can make all your problems disappear, for a price." They offered her $1 billion to neutralize Elise and ensure the files on Project Eclipse were destroyed. The words were honeyed, but the threat beneath them was clear. Refusal would mean certain death for both her and Elise. "You should also remember your own skeletons," the voice continued, their tone icy. "The case from 5 years ago, embezzlement charges. You were lucky it was swept under the rug. Imagine what could happen if it resurfaced." Caroline's breath hitched. That chapter of her life was one she thought she had buried, a mistake born of desperation to provide for her daughter. She had been young, reckless, and too trusting of those who promised quick fixes. The charges had been dropped, but the weight of that secret had never fully left her. "That's not relevant," Caroline snapped, though her voice wavered. "Isn't it?" The voice countered smoothly. "Your past makes you very persuadable. Consider your options carefully, Miss Voss, for your sake and your daughter's." Caroline's thoughts raced. She thought of her daughter, of the debts and dangers piling up around her. She thought of Elise, so determined and trusting. Her resolve wavered. "I'll think about it," she said at last, her voice trembling. Caroline returned to the safe house, masking her unease. Elise barely noticed, engrossed in her work. "I found another reference to the Phoenix Contingency," Elise said, her eyes bright with discovery. "It's tied to someone named Langston. Does that name mean anything to you?" Caroline froze, her reaction almost imperceptible. "Langston," she repeated. "I've heard the name. High up. Connected to everything." Elise nodded, missing the flicker of fear in Caroline's eyes. "I think he's the key." Caroline encouraged her to rest, subtly steering her away from uncovering too much. Elise reluctantly agreed, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. As Elise slept, Caroline sat alone, her thoughts a storm of guilt and desperation. Her burner phone buzzed with another message. "We're watching. Don't forget the stakes." Caroline deleted the message, her resolve faltering. She knew the walls were closing in. Elise woke in the middle of the night, restless. She moved to the desk where Caroline had been working and found a burner phone tucked beneath a pile of papers. The messages were cryptic but damning. Her stomach churned. Meanwhile, outside, Caroline stared into the dark horizon. Her phone buzzed again, the glow of the screen illuminating her conflicted face. Another message from the politician. "Time is running out. End it now, or we will." Inside, Elise unlocked another layer of her father's files. A new video began to play, the image of Oliver flickering to life once more. His voice was calm but urgent. "Elise, if you've made it this far, you're closer than I ever was. But be careful. The people around you, they may not be what they seem." Elise's gaze shifted toward the window, where Caroline's silhouette stood motionless against the faint glow of her phone. Suspicion bloomed in her chest as her father's warning echoed in her mind. The temporary safe house was quiet, except for the faint tapping of Elise's keyboard as she worked tirelessly on her father's encrypted files. The room was sparsely furnished, with stacks of papers and electronic devices scattered across every surface. A dim bulb hung from the ceiling, casting an uneven light over the room. Caroline paced near the window, her phone in hand. She glanced at Elise, who was hunched over the table, her eyes glued to the screen. "Any luck?" Caroline asked, her voice casual, though the tension in her tone was palpable. "I think I'm getting closer," Elise replied, distracted. "These files are layered with encryption, but I've broken through the first 2 levels. It's slow, but I'll get there." Caroline approached the table, leaning over Elise's shoulder. "You sure you're looking in the right places?" she asked. "Maybe you should focus on the smaller files first. The big ones could just be decoys." Elise frowned, turning to face her. "Why would my father leave decoys?" Caroline shrugged, avoiding Elise's gaze. "You never know. People like your dad, they plan for everything. Sometimes misdirection is key." Elise hesitated. Something about Caroline's suggestion felt off, but she brushed the thought aside. "I'll stick with my method. I'm starting to see patterns in the larger files. They're connected to something important." "Suit yourself," Caroline said, her tone light, but her eyes dark with unease. She stepped back, crossing her arms as she glanced out the window. She couldn't afford to let Elise get too far, not without consequences. A few moments later, Caroline's phone buzzed with a new message. She glanced at it quickly, then locked the screen. The words lingered in her mind. "You're running out of time. Finish it." Frustrated by her slow progress and Caroline's increasingly suspicious behavior, Elise stepped outside to make a call. The crisp night air bit at her skin as she dialed Marcus's number, her hands trembling slightly. The phone rang several times before Marcus picked up, his voice faint and strained. "Elise, you okay?" "I'm fine," she replied quickly, though her voice betrayed her tension. "Marcus, I need your help. I'm stuck, and I'm not sure who to trust anymore." There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again. "Be careful around Caroline," he said, his words deliberate despite his weak tone. "I've been tracking some things." Elise's heart sank. "Compromised? How?" "She's been in contact with someone high-ranking," Marcus explained. "Politicians. Executives. The kind of people tied to Project Eclipse. I intercepted fragments of communication. She's been meeting with them. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Elise asked, her voice rising with a mix of anger and fear. "Because I wasn't sure," Marcus admitted. "And I didn't want to make you paranoid without cause. But now, you need to be cautious." Elise closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing. "Marcus, I don't know what to do. She's been helping me, but now I'm not sure if it's real." Marcus coughed weakly, his voice fading for a moment before he continued. Listen to your instincts, Elise. Your father trusted you for a reason. And one more thing. I've been working on that phrase, the Phoenix contingency. It's complicated. I'll send you what I have. Marcus, you need to rest, Elise said, her voice softening. You sound awful. No time for that, Marcus replied, his tone firm despite his frailty. Promise me you'll keep going. Don't let them win. Elise swallowed hard. I promise. Derek sat alone in a dimly lit motel room, the faint hum of a nearby highway filtering through the thin walls. The room was sparse, a far cry from the luxury he'd grown accustomed to. On the table before him lay a photograph, him and Elise as children, grinning ear to ear, their father standing behind them with his hands resting protectively on their shoulders. He picked up the photo, his thumb brushing over their faces. Memories flooded his mind, late-night stories from their father, laughter that echoed through their home, and Oliver's unwavering protectiveness. He couldn't reconcile those cherished memories with his recent actions. You've betrayed her. The thought gnawed at him, refusing to be silenced. He replayed the confrontation with Thomas in his mind, the cold calculation in his stepfather's voice as he ordered Elise's elimination. Derek had nodded, gone along with the plan. But now, the weight of his choices was suffocating. On the bedside table sat an old note from his father, one he'd kept for years. He unfolded it and read the familiar words. Family is everything. Protect each other. Derek's jaw tightened. He couldn't undo the past, but he could act now. Grabbing his phone, he began drafting a message to Elise. Back at the safe house, Elise's laptop pinged with an encrypted email from Marcus. The subject line read, Urgent, Caroline. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Attached were screenshots of communications between Caroline and a high-ranking politician, meeting times, cryptic messages, and a payment trail that painted a damning picture. It's true, she murmured, her stomach turning. She's working with them. The final message from Marcus was short but heartfelt. You're stronger than you know. Don't stop now. Elise clenched her fists, anger and determination surging through her. She wouldn't let her father down. She wouldn't let Marcus's sacrifices be in vain. Elise stormed back into the safe house, the evidence from Marcus clutched tightly in her hand. Caroline looked up from her laptop, her expression neutral. We need to talk, Elise said, her voice cold. Caroline hesitated. What is it? Elise slammed the papers onto the table. This. You've been working with them. You've been sabotaging me this entire time. Caroline's face paled, but she quickly recovered, forcing calm into her tone. It's not what it looks like. I was trying to protect you. Protect me. Elise's voice rose. By lying to me? By meeting with the people who killed my father? Caroline stood, her hands raised in a placating gesture. Elise, listen to me. These people are dangerous. You don't understand what they're capable of. I was trying to keep you safe. Safe. Elise scoffed. By betraying me? By stalling my work? You think I'm safer in the dark? Caroline's composure cracked. You don't get it. They threatened my daughter. They'll come for me. For her. I didn't have a choice. Elise's eyes burned with anger. And what about me? Did you think I'd just lie down and die? You could have told me the truth. Caroline's expression twisted with guilt and frustration. Then, without warning, she lunged at Elise, her hands reaching for the phone. The two women struggled, knocking over the table in their fight. Elise's heart pounded as she wrestled against Caroline's grip. With a sharp elbow, she shoved Caroline back, sending her crashing into a chair. Gasping for breath, Elise grabbed the phone and bolted toward the door. Elise, wait! Caroline shouted, but her plea was drowned out by the sound of the door slamming shut. Elise's phone buzzed as she sprinted down the alley, her bag slung over her shoulder. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. Thomas is closing in. Get out now. Her heart raced as she read the message. There was no name, but the tone was unmistakable. It had to be Derek. Against her better judgment, she typed back. Why should I trust you? The reply came quickly. Because I'm done trusting him. I'm on your side now. Elise hesitated, torn between doubt and a flicker of hope. She packed her things, deciding it was better to move than risk staying put. With her bag slung over her shoulder, she slipped into the night. The city stretched before her, vast, unwelcoming, and full of unseen dangers. She didn't know where to go or who to trust, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stop. Meanwhile, Caroline sat in her car, gripping her phone tightly as a new message from the politician appeared on the screen. Finish the job, or your daughter pays the price. Far away, Derek tailed one of Thomas's men through the dimly lit streets. His resolve hardened with every step. For the first time, he was choosing to fight back, not just for Elise, but for their father and for his own redemption. In the safe house, the air was heavy with tension. The dim light flickered faintly, casting shadows across the room. Marcus sat at the desk, his face pale and drawn, but his sharp eyes focused on his laptop. Elise paced restlessly, her hands gripping her phone tightly. The door creaked open, and Derek stepped inside, his posture uncertain. You came, Elise said, her tone cold, her eyes narrowing as she studied her half-brother. Derek nodded, holding up a flash drive. I brought proof, he said, placing it on the table. Thomas's plans, their next moves, everything I could get without being noticed. Marcus grabbed the drive and plugged it into his laptop. As the files loaded, his gaze flicked between Derek and Elise. This could be a trap, Marcus said, his voice hoarse but steady. It's not, Derek said firmly. I'm done playing their game. I want to stop them as much as you do. Elise crossed her arms, skepticism etched across her face. Why now? She demanded. Why betray them after everything you've done? Derek's shoulders slumped. Because I've seen what they do to people like Caroline, he admitted. She thought she was untouchable, but the moment she outlived her usefulness, they threw her to the wolves. I don't want that to happen to you. Marcus's fingers flew over the keyboard, opening a file. He's telling the truth about the intel, Marcus muttered. These plans are legitimate. Elise hesitated, her mind racing. Finally, she looked at Derek. If you're serious about this, you'll have to prove it. No more half measures. No more lies. Derek nodded solemnly. I'll do whatever it takes. In a high-rise office downtown, Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression calm despite the tension thick in the room. Across from him, two politicians watched him with hawk-like intensity. You've been slow, Thomas, one of them said sharply. We're starting to question your commitment. Thomas's lips curled into a faint smile. I'm as committed as ever, he replied smoothly. But these things take time. Elise and her little group are slippery. Rushing this will only push them further underground. We've given you resources, the other politician countered. If you can't deliver, we'll find someone who can. Thomas leaned forward, his smile fading. You think you can replace me? He asked, his voice low and menacing. You forget who's been feeding you intel all this time. Without me, you'd be flying blind. The room fell silent. The politicians exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, one of them spoke. Prove your loyalty, Thomas. Deliver Elise and the evidence, or we'll ensure your name is dragged through the mud alongside Caroline's. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he nodded. You'll have what you need, he promised, though his mind was already calculating his next move. Caroline's downfall was swift and public. Elise had outmaneuvered her, using Marcus's recovered communications to expose her betrayal to the authorities. Caroline's arrest dominated the news, with outlets buzzing about her corruption and ties to illicit operations. The politicians wasted no time distancing themselves, framing Caroline as a rogue agent acting without their knowledge. Disposable, Marcus said bitterly as he watched the news coverage. That's all she ever was to them. Elise nodded, her gaze fixed on the screen. And now, they'll come for us. Elise frowned, her focus on the files spread across the table. And that's all anyone is to them, she said. We have to show the world how deep this goes. Marcus nodded, his fingers tapping the surface of the table. I've been digging into these files. The level of surveillance and manipulation is staggering. They've built an empire of control, and Caroline was just one of many pawns. Derek, standing by the window, clenched his fists. I helped them, he muttered, his voice filled with self-loathing. I was blind to what they really were. You see it now, Elise said, her tone softening slightly. That's what matters. Derek couldn't shake the image of Caroline's arrest. He had seen the same cold calculation in the politicians' eyes when they spoke about Elise. It was only a matter of time before they turned on him, too. He paced the room, his mind racing. They're planning something big, he said finally. Thomas mentioned a coordinated ambush. They're going to frame you and Marcus as terrorists. Elise looked up sharply. When? Soon, Derek replied. They're leaking just enough information to make you look like a threat. It'll give them an excuse to send in their agents. Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. We need to stay ahead of them. If they catch us, everything we've worked for will be lost. Then we don't let them catch us, Elise said firmly. We keep moving, and we hit them where it hurts. Over the next few days, the trio worked tirelessly, their uneasy alliance solidifying with each shared discovery. Marcus decrypted more files, uncovering evidence of illegal surveillance, financial manipulation, and covert operations tied to high-ranking officials. This is the Phoenix contingency, Marcus said, pointing to a series of documents. It's their backup plan if Project Eclipse is exposed. They'll use this to consolidate power under the guise of a national emergency. Elise leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the documents. Targets, she muttered, pointing to a list of names. Her own name, along with Marcus's and Derek's, was among them. Derek's jaw tightened. They're planning to silence us, he said. We're threats to their control. Then we make sure we're louder than ever, Elise said. We get this information out before they can stop us. Caroline's arrest bought the politicians time, but their focus quickly shifted back to Elise and Marcus. Thomas fed them just enough accurate information to keep their attention away from his duplicity, but the pressure on him grew. We need results, one politician snapped during a private call. Elise and Marcus are still out there. If you can't handle this, we'll find someone who can. Thomas's voice remained calm, but his eyes betrayed his stress. I'm handling it, he said. You'll have them soon enough. Meanwhile, the politicians deployed agents to track Elise and Marcus. The safe house was no longer safe, forcing the group to stay constantly on the move. The night of the ambush arrived quickly. Derek's insider knowledge proved crucial as he intercepted communications and warned Elise and Marcus just in time. They're coming, Derek said, bursting into the room. We need to leave now. Elise grabbed her bag, her heart pounding. What about their agents? How close are they? Close enough, Derek replied. But I've delayed their backup. We have a window. As they fled, Derek sabotaged key operations, redirecting agents and delaying their communications. His actions gave Elise and Marcus the time they needed to escape, though the pursuit was relentless. Hours later, in a remote hideout, Marcus finally cracked another layer of the encrypted files. The screen filled with detailed plans for the Phoenix contingency. This isn't just surveillance, Marcus said, his voice trembling. They're planning a staged attack, something catastrophic to justify their consolidation of power. Elise's blood ran cold. We have to stop this, she said. If they pull this off, they'll be unstoppable. Meanwhile, Thomas sat in his office, his face unreadable as he read a message from the politicians. You're running out of time. Deliver them, or you're next. The hidden cabin felt smaller as the weight of the moment pressed down on Elise, Marcus, and Derek. The air inside was heavy with anticipation, each of them fully aware that this was their last stand. Marcus sat hunched over his laptop at the center of the cluttered wooden table, the blue light casting shadows across his pale face. His hands trembled as he worked to finalize the decryption of the last set of files. Derek paced near the window, his movements restless. We need to move soon, he said, his voice edged with urgency. Thomas knows we're running out of places to hide. If he's turned on us, they'll be here before we're ready. Let me finish this, Marcus said without looking up, his voice weaker than usual, each word a struggle. If we can't get the evidence out, none of this matters. Elise sat on the edge of the couch, staring into the flickering flames of the fireplace. Her thoughts swirled with images of her father, his steady hands as he taught her how to solve puzzles as a child. You're stronger than you know, his voice echoed in her mind. She clenched her fists, drawing on every ounce of resolve she had left. We're ready for whatever comes, she said firmly. But this ends today. No more running. Derek stopped pacing and turned to her. You really think we can pull this off? He asked, his voice softer now, almost hesitant. His expression carried the weight of his guilt and uncertainty. Elise met his gaze, her own eyes sharp and unwavering. We don't have a choice, she replied, standing. We have to finish this. For Dad, for Marcus, for everyone who's been hurt by these people. They don't get to win. Marcus glanced up, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. It's going to take everything we've got, he said, his voice steady despite his obvious fatigue. But if we hit them hard enough, they won't have time to recover. Then let's not waste any more time, Elise said, her voice laced with determination. In a sleek boardroom overlooking the city, the politicians behind Project Eclipse convened for what would be their final move. Langston, their de facto leader, stood at the head of the table, his polished appearance betraying no hint of the chaos unfolding beneath the surface. Is the disinformation campaign live? Langston asked, his tone crisp and commanding. One of his subordinates nodded, their expression tense. The broadcasts have started. Elise, Marcus, and Derek are being framed as cyber-terrorists responsible for coordinated attacks across major cities. Leaked documents tie them to multiple crimes, including financial fraud and destabilization efforts. Langston's lips curled into a thin smile. Put out the event. The cyber attack is set to trigger in 6 hours, the subordinate replied. It will destabilize major infrastructure and justify the expansion of Project Eclipse. Langston's gaze shifted to Thomas, who sat at the far end of the table. His posture relaxed, but his eyes calculating. You've given us their location. Let's hope your intel is accurate this time. If they escape again, it'll be your head on the line. Thomas met his gaze evenly, his expression unreadable. They won't escape, he said, his voice calm and measured. But his mind churned with doubts. He had tipped off the politicians, but only partially. His true motives remained veiled even from himself. One of the politicians leaned forward, his tone sharp. We've given you every resource at our disposal, Thomas. If you can't deliver... I can deliver, Thomas interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You'll have them soon enough. Langston studied him for a moment longer before nodding. See that you do. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the tense silence of the cabin. Derek tensed, peering out the window. It's him, he said, his tone grim. Elise grabbed her bag, readying herself for a fight. Marcus shut his laptop and looked up at her, his expression a warning. Be careful, he said, his voice low. We don't know whose side he's really on. The door opened slowly, and Thomas stepped through, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. His sharp suit and calm demeanor were at odds with the tense atmosphere of the room. Relax, he said, his voice smooth. I'm not here to fight. Why are you here? Elise demanded, her voice like steel. Her eyes narrowed as she studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Thomas's gaze flicked to her, then to Derek and Marcus. To help, he said simply, his tone disarming. Derek let out a bitter laugh, his expression twisted with anger. Help? Like you've been helping us all along? Spare me the act, Thomas. We're not stupid. Thomas sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. You think I'm proud of what I've done? He asked, his voice low and tinged with bitterness. You think I don't know how far I've fallen? But I'm here now, and I can give you what you need to end this. Why should we trust you? Marcus asked, his tone wary, his gaze sharp. Thomas spread his hands in a gesture of surrender. Because if you don't, They'll win. They'll destroy everything, including you. Elise's eyes remained fixed on him, her expression hard. If you're lying, she began, her voice laced with quiet fury. Then you'll die anyway, Thomas finished, meeting her gaze evenly. I'm offering you a chance. Take it or leave it. The intel Thomas provided led the group to a sprawling high-tech facility on the outskirts of the city. It was heavily guarded, its perimeter bristling with cameras and armed patrols. The facility hummed with the energy of a hive preparing for a climactic event. Marcus, Derek, and Elise crouched behind a ridge overlooking the compound. We split up here, Marcus said, his voice firm despite his frailty. I'll handle the upload. You two disable the main server and communications hub. Elise nodded, checking her gear. We'll be fast, she promised, her voice steady, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. She glanced at Marcus, her concern evident. Are you sure you're up for this? Marcus gave her a faint smile. I've made it this far. I'm not stopping now. Derek placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his expression serious. Be careful, he said. You too, Marcus replied. The team moved as one, slipping through gaps in the perimeter. Guards patrolled in pairs, their radios crackling with updates. Elise and Derek dispatched them swiftly and silently, their movements honed by necessity. Inside the facility, Marcus found a secluded control room. He plugged his laptop into the mainframe, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. The files began uploading, a progress bar inching forward. Sweat beaded on his brow as he worked, his body protesting every movement. Elise and Derek reached the server room, its towering machines emitting a low hum. We need to overload it, Elise said, pulling out an EMP device. Derek nodded, his jaw set. I'll cover you. The server whirred as the EMP activated, sparks flying. Alarms blared, and armed guards stormed in. Derek took position, firing at their attackers with precision. Hurry, he shouted, his voice strained but resolute. Almost there. Elise called back, her hands steady despite the chaos. The EMP emitted a final burst, and the room plunged into darkness. In the facility's control room, Elise and Derek stood across from Langston. The politician exuded an air of authority and calm, his pristine suit a stark contrast to the chaos reverberating through the compound. Despite the growing panic, his confidence was unshaken. Langston's lips curved into a sardonic smile as he studied them. You're brave. I'll give you that, he said, his voice smooth and condescending. But bravery isn't enough to topple an empire. We're not here for bravery, Elise retorted, her voice firm. We're here for the truth. Langston let out a low chuckle, his amusement evident. Truth, he repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. You think the truth will save you? The truth is a weapon, and we wield it better than anyone. The public doesn't want freedom, Elise, they want security. And we give it to them. Derek stepped forward, his fists clenched. You're lying to them, he growled. You're using fear to control them, manipulating everything from behind the scenes. That's not security. That's tyranny. Langston's gaze shifted to Derek, his smile fading. Tyranny? Is that what you think? He said coldly. Let me tell you something, boy. Without us, there would be chaos. The world craves order, structure. People like you, clinging to ideals of freedom, would tear everything apart. Elise's voice rose, cutting through the tension like a blade. At what cost? She demanded. How many lives have you destroyed? How many people have you silenced just to keep your illusion of control? Langston's composure wavered for the first time. His jaw tightened, and his eyes narrowed. At whatever cost is necessary, he replied, his voice colder than before. You're too small to understand the bigger picture. We are the architects of stability. Without us, everything collapses. No, Elise shot back, her voice unwavering. Without you, people would have a chance to build something real, something honest. You're not architects of stability. You're parasites, feeding on fear and lies. Langston opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a notification pinged loudly from the control panel behind him. He turned, his expression shifting from irritation to alarm. The screens in the room lit up, displaying the files Marcus had uploaded. Incriminating evidence of Project Eclipse and the Phoenix contingency now scrolled across every screen, painting an irrefutable picture of corruption, manipulation, and abuse of power. Langston's confident facade cracked as he watched the data pour out in real time. News outlets around the world were now broadcasting the information, exposing the conspiracy in full for the first time. Fear flickered in his eyes. "This can't be happening," Langston muttered, his voice barely audible. He turned back to Elise and Derek, his composure unraveling. "You think you've won? This is only a setback. We rebuild." Elise stepped closer, her voice cold and cutting. "You're done, Langston. Your lies, your control, your entire empire. It's over." The facility trembled under the weight of the chaos unfolding around it. Alarms blared, and the air was thick with the acrid scent of burning wires and smoke. Marcus's hands flew across the keyboard, his every keystroke a fight against the mounting fatigue in his body. The files were uploading, each progress bar another step closer to exposing Project Eclipse and dismantling the Phoenix contingency. Derek and Elise burst into the control room, their faces flushed with exertion. "Marcus, we need to move." Elise shouted over the din, her voice strained with urgency. Marcus turned, his face pale but resolute. "I'll hold them off. The upload needs just a few more minutes." Elise's eyes widened in disbelief. "No, we're not leaving you," she protested, stepping toward him. Marcus shook his head, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Elise, you have to finish this. The world needs to see the truth. I've done what I came here to do." "Marcus, please," Derek interjected, his voice cracking. "There has to be another way." Marcus's gaze softened as he looked at Derek. "You've already found your way back, Derek. Now help Elise find hers." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each passing second. Marcus turned back to the screen, his voice calm but firm. "Go." Elise hesitated, her heart hammering in her chest. "We'll come back for you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You'd better not," Marcus replied, a faint chuckle escaping him. "Now go." Reluctantly, Elise grabbed Derek's arm and pulled him toward the exit. They glanced back one last time to see Marcus standing tall, his eyes filled with determination as he faced the approaching guards. "For Oliver," he murmured to himself before the doors burst open. Outside the facility, Elise and Derek stumbled into the night, the ground trembling beneath their feet as explosions rippled through the compound. Derek paused, his chest heaving as he turned to Elise. "He knew this was the only way," he said, his voice shaking. Elise wiped at her tear-streaked face, her hands trembling. "He didn't have to, but he believed in us. We can't let him down now." Derek straightened, his expression hardening. "Then we finish what he started. I'll lead us through this. They won't see what's coming." Elise nodded, her resolve rekindling. "Together, let's make them pay." As the facility crumbled behind them, they disappeared into the shadows, ready to fight for the truth Marcus had sacrificed everything to reveal. The siblings stepped into the uncertain darkness ahead, united in purpose and ready for the battles yet to come. In the days that followed, the world reacted to the revelations. Protests erupted, politicians resigned, and investigations began. But Elise knew their fight wasn't over. Some conspirators had escaped, and the battle for truth was far from finished. Sitting with Derek in a small apartment, Elise stared at the skyline. "Dad would be proud of us," she said softly. Derek nodded. "But he'd remind us there's still work to do." Elise looked at him, her resolve unshaken. "Then let's get to it." The world seemed to hold its breath before erupting into a cacophony of outrage and revelation. Within hours of the files Marcus and Elise had uploaded, the internet was ablaze with headlines, viral videos, and endless streams of commentary. News anchors struggled to keep up as they dissected the mountain of evidence exposing Project Eclipse and its sinister goals. Breaking news: one reporter announced on a global network, her voice tinged with disbelief. Documents released today reveal a covert initiative known as Project Eclipse, aimed at creating a global surveillance state under the guise of ensuring public safety. This includes evidence of mass manipulation, staged crises, and illegal financial dealings involving some of the world's most powerful figures. On social media, hashtags like #Eclipse, #PhoenixExposed, and #TruthPrevails trended within minutes. People from all walks of life shared their outrage, disbelief, and determination to hold those responsible accountable. Massive protests erupted across cities worldwide, demanding the resignation and prosecution of implicated politicians and executives. In a small apartment far from the chaos, Elise sat at a kitchen table with Derek, watching the news unfold on a battered laptop. The faint glow of the screen reflected off their weary faces. "They're finally seeing it," Elise said, her voice soft but firm. Her eyes lingered on the footage of crowds chanting for justice, holding signs demanding transparency and freedom. "It's out there. They can't bury it now." Derek nodded, his expression unreadable. "Marcus did it," he said quietly. "He gave them the truth." Elise reached over and placed a hand on his. "We did it together." By the next morning, high-profile arrests dominated the news cycle. Cameras captured Langston being escorted out of his mansion in handcuffs, his once impeccable suit now a symbol of disgrace. His expression was a mixture of defiance and disbelief as reporters shouted questions. "Langston, do you have any comments on the allegations?" one journalist called out. Langston sneered but said nothing as federal agents pushed him into a waiting car. Across the world, similar scenes played out. Corporate executives, law enforcement officials, and politicians were taken into custody, their power dismantled in a cascade of public outrage. In a dimly lit interrogation room, Thomas sat across from two federal agents. His face was calm, but his hands fidgeted with the cuffs around his wrists. "I was trying to stop them," Thomas insisted, his voice steady but tinged with desperation. "You have to believe me. I was working from the inside to bring them down." One of the agents leaned forward, her expression hard. "The evidence says otherwise, Mr. Thomas. Your actions facilitated one of the most dangerous conspiracies in modern history. You're going to have to do better than that." Behind the one-way glass, Derek watched the exchange silently. When Thomas's eyes briefly met his through the reflective surface, Derek's expression remained cold. He turned away. Weeks later, Elise and Derek found themselves on a brightly lit stage in a crowded hall. The room buzzed with energy as advocates, journalists, and everyday citizens celebrated the whistleblowers who had exposed Project Eclipse. A banner behind them read, "Truth Prevails, honoring the heroes who fought for freedom." As the event began, an official stepped forward to make a significant announcement. In recognition of their extraordinary courage and sacrifice in exposing one of the most dangerous conspiracies in modern history, Elise and Derek are hereby awarded a $10 billion compensation fund. The room erupted into applause as the official continued. This fund will not only honor their efforts but also provide reparations to the countless victims affected by Project Eclipse. Elise and Derek exchanged a glance, the weight of their accomplishments sinking in. The official wasn't finished. In addition, the government is proud to bestow upon Elise the National Honorary Medal of Valor, one of the highest civilian awards in the country, for her relentless pursuit of truth and justice. The medal gleamed as it was handed to Elise, who accepted it with trembling hands. The applause grew thunderous, and she was momentarily overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the recognition. Elise stepped up to the podium, the murmurs of the crowd falling silent. She looked out at the sea of faces, her heart heavy with the memory of those who hadn't made it this far. "This isn't just our victory," she began, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. "It belongs to everyone who refused to stay silent, to everyone who believed that the truth mattered, and to those we lost along the way." Her voice faltered briefly, but she pressed on. "My father taught me that truth isn't always easy, that it comes with a cost. Marcus showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. This victory is for them and for all of you who continue to fight for a better world." The audience erupted into applause, some rising to their feet. Derek watched his sister with a mixture of pride and humility, knowing how much she had carried on her shoulders. Later, during a quieter moment, Derek found Elise leaning against a railing, looking out over the city skyline. He approached hesitantly, the weight of unfinished words hanging between them. "Elise," he began, his voice softer than she was used to hearing, "I owe you an apology, for everything. For the mistakes I made, for not standing by you when it mattered most." Elise turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Why didn't you?" she asked, her tone calm but probing. Derek sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I was scared of losing everything, of being on the wrong side. I let them manipulate me because it was easier than facing the truth. But you never gave up. You fought for Dad's legacy, for the truth, and you were right." Elise's gaze softened, and she stepped closer. "You came back," she said simply. "That's what matters. You helped me finish this." They stood in silence for a moment before Derek spoke again. "I want to do more than just finish this," he said, his voice firm. "I want to help you build something better, a foundation in Dad's name to protect whistleblowers, to fight for transparency. Will you let me help?" Elise smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through the weariness in her eyes. "Of course," she said. "We'll do it together." In the weeks that followed, the world began to shift. Governments implemented stricter regulations on surveillance and corporate power. Whistleblowers around the globe were inspired to step forward, knowing they had support. Citizens became more vigilant, demanding accountability from their leaders. One afternoon, Elise visited a small, unassuming grave tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Kneeling by the headstone, she placed a single white lily against the cool stone. "We did it, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You were right about everything, about me, about the truth. I just wish you were here to see it." She stayed for a while, the breeze carrying her words into the silence. When she finally stood, she felt lighter, as though a piece of her father's strength had stayed with her. Elise and Derek stood side by side on the balcony of their newly established Foundation headquarters. Below them, the city buzzed with life, a testament to the resilience of people who refused to be silenced. "Think we're ready for this?" Derek asked, a wry smile playing on his lips. Elise glanced at him, her own smile forming. "We've already faced worse. What's a little more work?" They laughed softly, the sound carrying a note of hope. Elise reached into her pocket, pulling out her father's old phone. It was deactivated now, but she held it tightly, a tangible reminder of the journey they had completed. "He'd be proud of us," Derek said quietly. Elise nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "He would. And we'll make sure his legacy means something." Together, they stepped into the sunlight, ready to make the world a better place. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and like the video to support us. You can also turn on our notification so you don't miss more amazing stories like this. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing your comment on where you are watching from or the lessons you learnt in the story.